My brother pressed $400 into my palm and whispered for me to disappear before I embarrassed his new family. I smiled, nodded, and drove off like I was defeated. What he did not know was that the wealthy family friend funding his perfect weekend was not a friend at all. It was me, and the final payment was scheduled to clear at 8 in the morning on the day of his wedding. My name is Quinn Brooks, and I had driven 3 hours south to St. Augustine with a dress hanging in the back seat that I had specifically steamed for this moment. The venue was one of those sprawling historic estates, where the live oaks were draped in Spanish moss and the driveway was paved with crushed shells that crunched expensively under tires. It was the kind of place that smelled of jasmine and old money. Exactly the atmosphere my brother Tate and his fiancée Camille were desperate to project. I pulled my sedan into the valet lane, the engine idling with a soft hum. I was calm. I was ready to celebrate. I was ready to play the role of the supportive sister, the one who stayed out of the spotlight and smoothed over the rough edges of our family history. But before I could even shift the car into park, the driver's side door was yanked open. It was Tate. He looked frantic. The humid Florida air had already made his hair stick to his forehead, and there was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip that had nothing to do with the temperature. He was wearing a cream-colored linen suit that I knew cost more than his car payments, and his eyes were darting around the entrance like he was scanning for a sniper. "Don't get out," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. He put a hand on the roof of my car, effectively blocking me from rising. I stared at him, my hand hovering over the seatbelt buckle. "Tate, what is going on? The dinner starts in 15 minutes. He winced, looking over his shoulder toward the grand entrance where guests were beginning to mingle. Men in boat shoes and women in pastel silks were laughing, holding flutes of champagne. Tate turned back to me, his expression tight with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Look, Quinn, we have a situation," he said, leaning in closer so the valet attendant wouldn't hear. "Camille is freaking out. Her parents invited the Donahues and the Caldwells, serious people, donors for her dad's foundation, country club people." "Okay," I said slowly, testing the weight of the moment. And Camille thinks it is best if you sit this one out tonight." Tate rushed the words, like ripping off a bandage. "She just doesn't want any awkward energy. You know how you get. You ask questions. You wear that." He gestured vaguely at my travel clothes, ignoring the garment bag hanging clearly in the back. "She wants tonight to be perfect. She wants it seamless." I felt a cold sensation spread through my chest, distinct from the humidity wrapping around us. "You are uninviting me to your welcome dinner?" "I drove 3 hours, Tate." "Not uninviting," he corrected, though his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Managing. Look, we have a compromise for the ceremony tomorrow. You can come. We want you there, but Camille thinks you would be more comfortable at a table near the service station, in the back. You won't have to make small talk with the investors. You can just eat and relax." A table near service, like I was staff, like I was a dirty secret that needed to be kept in the shadows to avoid staining the white tablecloths. I looked past him, through the windshield. Standing on the veranda, about 50 feet away, was our mother, Marla. She was holding a glass of white wine, looking resplendent in navy blue. She was watching us. She saw Tate leaning into my car. She saw his frantic gestures. She saw me trapped in the driver's seat, our eyes locked. I expected her to wave. I expected her to come down and tell Tate to stop being ridiculous. Instead, Marla watched the humiliation unfold, tipped her head back, and laughed at something a woman next to her said, turning her back to me completely. She had seen, she had heard, and she had decided it was not her problem. Tate took my silence for hesitation. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a clip of cash. He fumbled with it, his fingers shaking slightly, and thrust the bills into my hand, which was still resting on the steering wheel. "Here," he said. "There is $400 there. Go back into town. Get a hotel room. Fix your look. Just try. Quinn, try to look like you belong here tomorrow. Please, do it for me. I looked down at the bills in my hand. $400. The price of his dignity. The price of my silence. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't a break. It was a calcification. The part of me that had spent the last 10 years bailing Tate out of bad investments, covering Marla's rent when she overspent on vacations, and quietly funding the lifestyle they felt entitled to, that part of me didn't die. It just froze. I looked up at Tate. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the money back in his face. I channeled every ounce of professional restraint I had honed over a decade of high-stakes corporate negotiation. "You are right," I said, my voice steady and smooth. I pocketed the $400. "I won't embarrass you, Tate, I promise." Relief washed over his face, making him look young and foolish. "Thank you. Quinn, seriously, just lay low tonight. I will text you the details for tomorrow." "Don't worry about it," I said. "I know exactly where I need to be." He slammed my car door shut, tapped the roof twice in a dismissive signal to leave, and turned back toward the party. Adjusting his jacket, he walked away without looking back, striding toward the life he thought he had purchased. I shifted the car into reverse. The valet attendant looked at me with confusion, but I just gave him a polite nod. I backed out of the lane, navigating the crushed shells with precision. I drove down the long, winding driveway, past the ancient oaks and the hanging moss, moving further and further away from the music and the laughter. I maintained the expression of the defeated, obedient sister until I turned onto the main asphalt road. Then, the mask dropped. My face went still. The hurt vanished, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of a balance sheet that didn't add up. I reached for my phone on the passenger seat. I didn't call Tate. I didn't call Marla to beg for an explanation. I dialed a number I only used for business. Serious business. The phone rang twice before it was answered. "Riley," I said, my voice devoid of any sisterly warmth, stripped down to the steel of a director of risk. "I need you to pull up the Brooks Hartwell file. Yes, right now. I am invoking the termination clause on the funding." I glanced in the rearview mirror at the fading lights of the venue. "Effective immediately," I said. "Cancel everything. To my family. I am a collection of soft, disappointing adjectives. I am the quiet one, the plain one. The one who is perpetually finding herself because I drive a sedan that is 6 years old and I wear off-the-rack blazers instead of designer silk. In the narrative Tate and Marla have constructed, I am the sister who is currently in between jobs, a phrase they whisper to relatives with a mixture of pity and relief, because it means they do not have to ask me for details about my life. They prefer me this way. A struggle they can look down on is much more comfortable than a success they cannot control. The reality, however, is a spreadsheet they have never seen. I am the director of vendor risk and contracts at Garnet and Vale Advisory. It is a boutique firm, the kind that does not advertise on billboards because our clients are the type of entities that own the billboards. I specialize in high-stakes hospitality and property partnerships. My entire career is built on the ability to read the fine print that others ignore. I assess liability. I predict failure points in multi-million-dollar deals. I do not win arguments by raising my voice or throwing wine in faces. I win by understanding the terms of the agreement better than the person sitting across from me. I win with leverage, with timing, and with the absolute crushing weight of a contract enforced to the letter. Tate does not know this. He thinks I work in data entry or some admin thing. He never asked, so I never corrected him. 3 months ago, that ignorance worked in his favor. He came to my apartment late on a Tuesday, pacing my living room floor, vibrating with the manic energy of a man who had promised the moon and realized he could not even afford a flashlight. He told me about Camille. He told me about the wedding. He told me she wanted a heritage venue weekend with a waterfront reception and a historic chapel, the kind of event that signals generational wealth to everyone in attendance. He was short $20,000 for the deposit, and he needed another $30,000 to secure the vendors. He sat on my beige sofa and swore to me, with tears in his eyes, that this was just a liquidity issue. He claimed he had a massive commission coming from a commercial real estate deal that was closing in 2 weeks. He just needed a bridge loan. He promised he would pay me back with interest. He promised he would handle the rest of the wedding costs himself once that check cleared. I knew he was lying. I work in risk assessment. I know the smell of a bad asset. There was no commission. There was no big deal closing. Tate sells residential insurance, and he is mediocre at it on his best days. But he is my brother, and 3 months ago, that title still carried enough weight to bypass my professional judgment. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted him to have the win. So, I structured the bailout in a way that would protect his ego. I did not write him a personal check. I told him I had a contact, an investor looking for tax write-offs, who could sponsor the event as a private function. I routed the payments through a single-member limited liability company I control, an entity I use for holding property assets, to the venue and the vendors. The checks did not come from Quinn Brooks, the disappointing sister. They came from Obsidian Holdings. I funded the initial deposit. I signed the vendor contracts as the authorized representative of the payer, and most critically, I set up the final payment schedule. The remaining balance, covering the catering, the open bar, the venue rental, and the staff gratuities, was set to autodraft from the Obsidian Holdings corporate account at 8 o'clock in the morning on the day of the ceremony. Tomorrow morning, I even booked their honeymoon. Tate had looked so pathetic when he admitted he couldn't afford the flights to the Maldives that Camille had been bragging about on Instagram. I added it to the package, paying for the flights and the overwater bungalow through the same corporate account, filing it away under the mental heading of charity. I drove the long stretch of highway back toward my home, the silence of the car amplifying the hum of the tires on the asphalt. The scenery blurred past, strip malls, palm trees, the endless stretch of Florida flatlands, but my mind was focused on the architecture of the deal I had made with my own family. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house was dark. It is a modest house from the outside, intentionally so, but inside it is precise, modern, and paid for. I unlocked the door, dropped my keys in the bowl, and walked straight to my home office. I did not turn on the overhead lights. The glow from the street lamps outside filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of shadow across my desk. I poured myself a glass of bourbon. Neat. I took a long sip, letting the burns settle the cold feeling in my stomach, and then I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I pulled out a thick, navy blue folder. The label on the tab was handwritten in black ink. The Brooks Family Ledger. I sat down and opened it. This was not a sentimental scrapbook. It was an audit trail. Inside were years of receipts. There was the $6,000 I paid to fix Marla's transmission when she claimed the mechanic was trying to cheat her. There was the $4,000 for Tate's business startup 5 years ago, a drop-shipping company that never shipped a single product. There were the rent payments I covered when Tate was between apartments. There were the grocery bills I quietly paid when I noticed Marla's refrigerator was empty. I turned the pages, looking at the totals, tens of thousands of dollars, a decade of subsidies. I had tracked every cent, not because I expected to be repaid, but because data is the only way to prove reality to people who live in fantasy. I had enabled them. I had cushioned every fall, smoothed every road, and allowed them to believe that their luck was just naturally good. They thought they were survivors. They did not realize they were simply passengers in a vehicle I was fueling. Tate's voice echoed in my head. Disappear before you embarrass her family. He did not just reject me. He rejected the architect of his survival. He took the safety net I had woven for him and used it to strangle my dignity. He thought the $400 he shoved into my hand was a power move. He thought he was buying my compliance. I looked at the final page of the ledger, where the pending transaction for the wedding sat like a loaded gun, $52,000 and change, scheduled to clear in less than 12 hours. If I did nothing, the money would leave my account. The venue would be paid, the champagne would flow, Tate would stand at the altar, sweating in his expensive suit, and toast to his own success, while I sat at a back table near the kitchen, silent and invisible. I closed the folder. The sound was soft, a mere whisper of cardstock. But in the quiet room, it sounded like a gavel coming down. This was not about revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This was a correction. It was a market adjustment. For 10 years, I had artificially inflated the value of my brother's life. I had subsidized his ego at the expense of my own self-respect. I reached for my laptop and logged into the banking portal for Obsidian Holdings. The screen cast a blue light over my face as I navigated to the scheduled transfers. There it was, the pending wire. I was not doing this to hurt him. I was doing this because he had explicitly asked to be separated from me. He wanted to be independent of the embarrassment that was his sister. He wanted to stand on his own 2 feet, surrounded only by the people who matched his new aesthetic. I was simply granting his wish. I hovered the cursor over the cancel button. Tate wanted a life without Quinn Brooks? Fine, he could have it, but he would have to pay for it himself. I clicked the mouse. The screen refreshed. Transaction canceled. I sat back in my chair and took another sip of bourbon. The boundary had been set. The entitlement had been severed. The ledger was finally closed. Now, I would just wait for gravity to take over. Riley answered on the first ring. He did not waste time with pleasantries or ask why I was calling so late on a Friday night. In our line of work, a call at this hour meant a contract was bleeding, and Riley was excellent at applying tourniquets. I need a stop payment issued on the Brooks Hartwell venue authorization, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the silence of my home office. Immediate effect. Flag the transaction as unauthorized due to misrepresentation of the primary payer. Understood, Riley replied, the sound of his keyboard clicking in the background like rapid-fire gunfire. I am pulling the file now. Obsidian Holdings is the guarantor. You want to sever the link completely? Completely, I confirmed. Revoke the vendor access tokens and notify the venue management that the funds will not clear at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Tell them the entity funding the event has withdrawn support due to a breach of agreement. Done, Riley said, his tone clinical. Notifications are going out to the venue director and the catering lead now. Do you want me to draft a formal liability shield? Have it ready, I said. But do not send it yet. Let the silence do the work first. I hung up and placed my phone face up on the desk next to the glass of bourbon. Then I waited. The dominoes fell with precise, terrifying speed. My phone began to buzz at 11:42 at night. The screen lit up with Tate's name. I let it ring. It vibrated against the wood of my desk. A desperate, mechanical plea for attention. I watched the name flash and fade, flash and fade. He called again a minute later, then again. The first voicemail arrived at 11:45. I pressed play, listening to the audio fill the quiet room. Quinn? Hey, it is Tate. His voice was tight, pitched high with forced casualness. Listen, the venue guy just called me. He said there is some weird glitch with the wire transfer for tomorrow. He got an automated alert saying the funds were revoked. I told him it is just a banking error, probably a security flag or something. Can you call the bank and authorize it? Call me back as soon as you get this. It is urgent. I took a sip of my drink. He thought it was a glitch. He thought the universe had simply made a clerical error. He could not conceive that the sister he had dismissed to the shadows was capable of turning off the lights. The calls continued past midnight. The second voicemail was less polite. Quinn, pick up the phone. Seriously, pick up. They are saying the account holder pulled the plug. I cannot get a hold of anyone. Camille is asking why the coordinator is texting her this late. You need to fix this, now. I did not block him. Blocking him would have been a mercy. It would have given him a reason to stop trying. Instead, I let the line remain open, a ghostly connection that he could not quite grasp. I wanted him to feel the specific agony of being ignored, the same way I had felt standing in the valet lane while he handed me cash to disappear. I sat there for 2 hours, watching the notifications stack up like evidence. By 2 a.m, the texts had turned from panicked to abusive. You are ruining this. Pick up. Are you asleep? call me. I finally went to bed at 3 o'clock, sleeping deeply and without dreams. I woke up at 6:30 in the morning to the sound of birds chirping and a phone that had finally stopped ringing. Tate had likely passed out from exhaustion or was currently manic, trying to strategize a lie that would survive the daylight. The sunrise over St. Augustine would be beautiful today, golden light hitting the water, illuminating the Spanish moss, but at the venue, the atmosphere would be significantly less romantic. At 7 o'clock, the venue manager, a fastidious man named Elias, would have arrived to open the gates for the vendors. He would have checked his system, seen the red flags on the account, and followed protocol. My phone buzzed with an email notification from the venue's automated system. Copy to the payer of record. Subject: Event cancellation warning. Outstanding balance. It had begun. I imagined the scene as I made coffee. The florist trucks would be idling at the service entrance. The drivers confused as security refused to lift the gate. The catering vans, loaded with thousands of dollars of perishables, would be stalled in the parking lot. The head chef arguing with Elias. Tate would be awake now. He would be in the bridal suite or his own hotel room, staring at his phone, realizing that 8 o'clock was approaching and the glitch had not cleared. He would have to make a choice, tell the truth or double down on the lie. Tate chose the lie. At 7:45, my phone pinged with a text from a mutual acquaintance who was a bridesmaid, unaware of who was actually paying. Total chaos here. Tate says the bank system is down globally. He is freaking out. He was blaming the banking infrastructure. He was stalling, hoping that if he screamed loud enough, the money would materialize out of thin air. But the Hartwells were early risers. Graham Hartwell, Camille's father, arrived at the venue at 8:15 for the first look photos. He was a man who built a logistics empire. He understood supply chains. He understood that when a florist truck is parked outside the gate and the driver is smoking a cigarette with his arms crossed, it is not a banking glitch. It is a non-payment. I could picture Graham walking up to Elias. I could hear the conversation. Elias, professional and apologetic, explaining that the funding source had been withdrawn due to misrepresentation. Tate would have been standing there, sweating in his tuxedo, his phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline that had been cut. "It is just paperwork, Graham," Tate would have said, his voice cracking. "I have the money. It is just the wire transfer protocols. They are so strict these days." But the florists were leaving. The catering manager was instructing his team to keep the doors of the refrigerated trucks closed. Camille would have arrived moments later, expecting a fairy tale. Instead, she walked into a foreclosure. I received a text from Tate at 8:30. It was just one word. "Please." I deleted it. According to the timeline of the morning, the explosion happened right on the perfectly manicured lawn. Camille did not turn on Tate. That would require her to admit she had married a man who could not pay for his own wedding. That would require her to admit she had been fooled. Instead, she found a target that protected her pride. "It is Quinn," she reportedly shrieked, loud enough for the departing florists to hear. "She is doing this on purpose. She is jealous because she is alone and miserable. She is sabotaging us because Tate didn't let her sit at the head table." It was a frantic, illogical accusation, but it was easier than the truth. Graham Hartwell did not scream. He did not join in the accusations. He looked at the stalled trucks. He looked at his daughter, whose mascara was beginning to run, and then he looked at Tate. Graham took out his checkbook. He walked over to Elias and asked for the total. When Elias gave him the number, $52,000 and change, Graham did not flinch. He wrote the check. He handed it to the manager and instructed him to open the gates. The wedding would go on, the flowers would be unloaded, the champagne would be poured, but as Graham turned back to Tate, the dynamic had shifted permanently. He did not look at Tate with the pride of a father-in-law. He looked at him with the cold, assessing stare of a man who realizes he has just bought a very expensive lemon. The money was paid, but the debt was now owed to a man who did not offer payment plans. I finished my coffee and set the mug down on the counter. The silence in my house was peaceful. I had not stopped the wedding, but I had done something far more significant. I had forced Tate to show his hand. And now, everyone knew he was holding absolutely nothing. My phone vibrated against the center console of my car. I was parked at a public beach access point about 5 miles north of the venue. Watching the Atlantic Ocean churn, I had not driven back to the city yet. I needed the salt air to clear the smell of expensive perfume and betrayal from my senses. The notification was not from Tate. It was not from Marla. It was from a number I did not immediately recognize, but the contact name popped up a second later. Elena, the assistant venue coordinator. I had spent hours on the phone with her over the last 3 months, going over line items, allergies, and lighting cues. She was efficient, young, and observant. The message was a single audio file with a short text attached. I was testing the audio setup in the bridal suite for the videographer and left the feed running while I stepped out for coffee. I think you need to hear what was said when they thought no one was listening. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the play button. Part of me, the part that was still the protective big sister, wanted to delete it. I wanted to drive home, pretend the wedding had happened without incident, and go back to my quiet, solitary life. But the director of risk in me knew better. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is liability. I pressed play. The sound was crisp, recorded through high-quality microphones intended to capture sentimental vows. Instead, it captured the clinking of champagne flutes and the high-pitched, raucous laughter of Camille and her bridesmaids. "Did you see his face?" Camille's voice cut through the static, sharp and mocking. "He looked like he was going to vomit. I swear, if that payment issue was his sister's doing, I am going to scream. She is such a bitter little thing." She looked like a librarian at the welcome dinner. Another voice chimed in. "Who wears a blazer to a waterfront cocktail hour?" "Someone who cannot afford a stylist." Camille laughed. "Tate is too nice to her. Honest to God, he is a saint. He told me she is constantly hounding him for money, like she cannot hold down a real job. So she comes to him with these sob stories about needing investments or loans for her car." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. The ocean outside my window blurred. Tate had not just accepted my help. He had rewritten reality. He had inverted our entire relationship to preserve his ego. In his version of the story, I was the leech. I was the financial drain. He had painted me as the desperate, unsuccessful sibling so that Camille would never question where the money was actually coming from. It was a masterclass in projection. He was feeding her lies to make me look small, ensuring that if I ever tried to tell the truth, I would just look like the jealous, broke sister trying to tear him down. The audio continued. I could hear the rustle of silk, the sound of makeup brushes being set down on glass tables. "Well, do not worry," Camille said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "After the honeymoon, we are done. Tate agreed. We are going to cut her off. No more handouts." "Finally," a bridesmaid said. "But wait," Camille added, and I could practically hear the smirk in her voice. "We have to be smart about it. Tate says she has decent credit. Even if she has no cash, we are going to get Marla to pressure her into co-signing for that renovation loan on the new house first. Just a signature. Then we ghost her." I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the heat. They were planning to use me one last time. They wanted to harvest my credit score before discarding me. It was predatory. It was calculated. And it was being orchestrated by the brother I had just spent $50,000 trying to save. Then came the final blow, the detail that made my blood run cold. "At least you guys have the condo in Palm Coast," the bridesmaid said. "That is a huge asset. You do not have to worry about rent." "Totally," Camille replied, sounding smug. "Tate was so smart to structure that. He told me he put the deed in an LLC for liability reasons. You know, to protect us from lawsuits. We just pay the rent to his holding company to keep the paper trail clean. But it is effectively ours. He owns the LLC." I froze. The sound of the ocean faded away completely. Tate had told her he owned the condo. He had told her the LLC on the lease, Obsidian Holdings, was his. I looked down at the dashboard, my breathing shallow. That condo in Palm Coast was my property. I had purchased it 3 years ago as a long-term rental investment, when Tate and Camille needed a place to live temporarily while they saved for a house. I had let them move in. I charged them a nominal rent that barely covered the HOA fees, and half the time, they did not even pay that. Tate had taken my generosity and twisted it into an asset on his own balance sheet. He was living in my house, pretending to be my landlord, and claiming my company was his personal tax shelter. This was not just a family squabble anymore. This was fraud. He was misrepresenting assets to his wife, likely to her father, and potentially to banks if he was trying to leverage his company for loans. I stopped the recording. I did not cry. The hurt I had felt earlier, the sharp sting of rejection, hardened into something heavy and cold, like a stone in my gut. I forwarded the audio file immediately. I did not send it to Tate. I did not send it to Marla. I sent it to Nolan Pierce, my personal attorney. I typed a single line in the subject field: evidence regarding Brooks versus Brooks. Keep this on file. We may need it later. Then, I opened my contact list and found Tate's name. The typing bubble appeared on the screen. He was drafting another text, another lie, another plea. Maybe he was going to tell me the bank finally called him back. Maybe he was going to ask me to co-sign that loan Camille mentioned. I did not wait to find out. I pressed block caller. I did the same for his text messages. Then I went to his social media profiles and blocked him there too. I blocked Camille. I blocked Marla. It was not an act of anger. It was an act of quarantine. For 10 years, my reflex had been to rescue him. When he fell, I caught him. When he lied, I covered for him. When he was broke, I funded him. Blocking him was the only way to stop my own muscle memory. I had to remove the option to save him. I put the car in gear. The wedding was happening miles away. Tate was standing at the altar, lying to his bride, lying to her father, and lying to himself. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully cut out the cancer of his embarrassing sister. He had no idea that he had actually cut the only lifeline keeping him from drowning. I turned onto the highway, heading north, away from St. Augustine, away from the lies, and back toward the reality that I, and I alone, owned. The silence in the car was not empty. It was full of possibilities, and for the first time in a decade, my bank account was safe. The wedding happened. That is the thing about people like the Hartwells. They do not let a disaster stop the show. They simply pay to pave over it. Graham Hartwell wrote the check that cleared the venue balance. The florists unpacked the hydrangeas, and Tate stood at the altar in his tuxedo, sweating through his shirt, but smiling like a man who had pulled off the heist of the century. He likely told himself that the worst was over. He assumed that because the ceremony took place, the contract of our sibling relationship was still intact. He believed that I was dramatic, perhaps a bit vindictive, but ultimately harmless. He thought I would cool off. He thought I would not dare touch the honeymoon. He was wrong. Monday morning at Jacksonville International Airport is a specific kind of ecosystem. It is filled with tired business travelers and excited tourists. Tate and Camille arrived at the Delta counter with 4 oversized suitcases, looking every inch the golden couple. They were heading to the Maldives. It was a $12,000 package that included business-class seats, a private seaplane transfer, and 7 nights in an overwater villa. They approached the priority lane. I was not there, but I can reconstruct the scene with the precision of an accident investigator because I know the systems involved. Tate handed over his passport. He was probably making a joke about the humidity. Camille was likely checking her reflection in her phone, already planning the caption for her departure photo. The gate agent, a woman named Patricia, I know this because I later read the incident report filed with the airline, would have typed in their confirmation code. She would have paused. The typing would have stopped. I see your reservation here, Mr. Brooks, Patricia would have said, her voice professional but firm. However, there is a flag on the payment method. That is impossible, Tate would have replied. his smile faltering. "It is paid in full. We have the itinerary." "The payment was revoked by the card issuer yesterday," Patricia explained. "The card ending in 4190, Obsidian Holdings, the transaction was voided as unauthorized." I imagined the blood draining from Tate's face. He knew that card number. He knew that company name. And for the first time, standing under the fluorescent lights of the terminal, he realized that the glitch was a guillotine. "It is a corporate card," Tate stammered, loud enough for the people in line behind them to hear. "There is just a hold on it. Just run it again, or override it." "I cannot override a revoked payment, sir," Patricia said. "If you want to keep these seats, I can rebook you now. But because we are within 24 hours of departure, the fare class has changed." "Fine," Camille snapped. Stepping forward, she was irritable, likely hungover from the reception, and she had no patience for logistics. "Just pay it, Tate. My dad already had to deal with the venue mess. Do not make this a thing. How much is it?" Patricia tapped a few keys. "To reinstate the business class tickets and the connecting transfers, the total comes to $14,350. $14,000. Tate did not have $14,000. Tate did not have $1,400. He had the $400 he had tried to bribe me with, and perhaps a credit limit of $2,000 on his personal card. "I need to make a call," Tate whispered. "Make a call?" Camille's voice rose, sharp and piercing. "Tate, give her your card. We are going to miss the flight." "I cannot," Tate finally snapped, the pressure valve bursting. "The money is not there. Camille, the account is locked." That was when Camille exploded. It was not a dignified weeping, it was a tantrum. She slammed her hand on the counter. She screamed that this was ridiculous, that she was being sabotaged, that she was a VIP. She turned on Tate, shoving his shoulder. In the age of digital surveillance, privacy is a myth. 3 different passengers raised their phones. Within minutes, a video was circulating on social media of a bride in a designer travel suit screaming at an airline employee while her husband cowered against the baggage scale. Airport security did not arrest them, but they did intervene. 2 officers approached, their expressions bored but serious. They asked Camille to lower her voice. When she refused, claiming she was being persecuted, they firmly escorted her and Tate away from the counter and out of the secure area. They were left standing on the curb at the drop-off zone, surrounded by their luggage, with no tickets and no dignity. Camille did the only thing she knew how to do in a crisis. She called her father. I can only imagine the conversation, but I know the result. She called Graham Hartwell, sobbing, hysterical. She told him that I had done this. She screamed that Quinn Brooks had called the airline and canceled their honeymoon out of spite. She wanted her father to fix it. She wanted him to sue me. She wanted him to destroy me. But Graham Hartwell is not a man who reacts to tears. He reacts to facts. He listened to his daughter rant about how I had access to the reservation. He listened to her scream that I had revoked the payment. And then, he asked the question that Tate had been dreading for 3 years. "Camille," Graham said, his voice cutting through her hysteria, "why did your husband's sister have access to your honeymoon purchase in the first place? Why was her name on the payment file?" Silence. Because if I had the power to cancel it, that meant I was the one who had paid for it. And if I had paid for the honeymoon, and Graham had paid for the wedding, then what exactly had Tate paid for? The illusion of Tate's success did not just crack, it shattered. I was sitting on my patio with a cup of tea when the notification hit my phone. Refund. Processed. $12,400 credited to Obsidian Holdings. The money was back in my account. The trip was gone. The bridge was burned. I did not feel a surge of triumph. I did not feel the need to pop a bottle of champagne or post a cryptic quote on Instagram. I felt a profound, quiet sense of relief. It was the feeling of putting down a heavy backpack after carrying it for 10 miles. I opened my laptop. I did not rebook the Maldives. I did not look for 5-star resorts where I could be seen. I booked a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains for a week. Just me, a stack of books, and the silence of the woods. It cost $1,200. I paid for it with my own money, from my own account, and I did not have to ask anyone for permission. I was no longer negotiating my dignity. I was no longer paying a premium to be treated like a discount relative. Later that evening, I received a text from a mutual friend. Sarah. She had been at the airport, purely by coincidence, and had seen the aftermath. She told me that Camille was refusing to speak to Tate. She told me that the Hartwells had sent a car to pick Camille up, leaving Tate to find his own ride. But the most interesting detail was the last one. Camille is telling everyone that Tate lied about the honeymoon money. Sarah wrote, and now she is freaking out about the house. She is demanding that Tate prove he actually owns the condo in Palm Coast. She wants to see the deed. I looked at the message and took a sip of my tea. Tate had told her he owned the condo. He had told her he owned the LLC. He had built his entire marriage on the foundation of my assets. Now, his wife was demanding to see the paperwork. He could not show her the deed because the deed did not have his name on it. He could not show her the LLC formation documents because he was not a member. He could show her nothing but his own empty hands. I typed a reply to Sarah. 2 simple sentences. Good. Let them chase the truth. I set the phone down. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my yard. I was alone, but for the first time in years, I was not lonely. I was free. The silence following the airport catastrophe did not last long. Tate and Camille retreated to the sanctuary of the Palm Coast condo. The property Tate had spent 3 years calling his estate. It was a sleek, 2-bedroom unit in a gated community called The Reserves, a place where the lawns were manicured to within an inch of their lives, and the Homeowners Association wielded power with the ruthlessness of a small government. For a week, things were quiet. I assumed they were licking their wounds, perhaps finally having the difficult conversation about finances that should have happened 6 months ago. I imagined Tate sitting at the kitchen island, looking at his bank app, finally admitting that the math did not work. I was wrong. They were not reflecting. They were rebranding. Camille, stinging from the humiliation of the viral airport video which had garnered over 50,000 views, decided that the best defense was a distraction. She needed a new narrative. She needed to pivot from glamorous honeymooner to relatable home renovation influencer. She announced on her social media channels that they were skipping the Maldives not because they were broke, but because they had decided to invest in their forever home. She called it her sanctuary era. The problem was that genuine renovation requires permits, licensed contractors, and architectural approval from the HOA board. All of those things take time and money. Camille had neither. She wanted content, and she wanted it immediately. She hired a handyman crew she found on a community message board. These were not licensed general contractors. They were 3 guys with a truck and a circular saw who accepted cash and did not ask questions about load-bearing walls. I did not know any of this was happening until Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in a quarterly risk assessment meeting at Garnet and Vale when my personal phone lit up with a priority notification. It was not a text. It was a digital delivery from the Reserves Property Management System. Subject: Urgent Compliance Violation. Unit 404. Structural Interference. My stomach dropped. The HOA did not send urgent emails for leaving trash cans out too long. I excused myself from the meeting and opened the attachment in the hallway. It was a formal cease and desist order accompanied by photographs taken by a neighbor and the building maintenance supervisor. The photos showed a pile of debris on the balcony, drywall, insulation, and most terrifyingly, twisted metal studs. The text of the violation was chilling. Unpermitted demolition of interior partitioning. Vibration complaints from Unit 304 and Unit 504. Maintenance inspection reveals removal of vertical supports in the main living area. I scrolled down to the bottom of the report, where the community engineer had added a preliminary note in red text. Potential load distribution risk. Engineering review required immediately. The removed partition appears to be a shear wall component essential for the structural integrity of the 4th floor span. They had not just knocked down a wall to open up the kitchen. They had removed a structural element that held up the ceiling. They were filming a demo day montage while literally undermining the safety of the entire building. I did not feel anger. I felt the cold, sharp clarity of a liability crisis. This was no longer about Tate's ego or Camille's pride. This was about physics. If that ceiling sagged, if a pipe burst due to the shift, or if the floor compromised, Obsidian Holdings, and by extension, I, would be liable for millions of dollars in damages, not to mention the potential for physical injury. I called the property manager immediately. "This is the representative for Obsidian Holdings," I said, my voice clipped and professional. "I received the notice for Unit 404. What is the status?" "We tried to stop them," the manager said, sounding frantic. "The tenant, Mr. Brooks, refused entry to our maintenance team. He claims he owns the unit and can do what he wants with the interior. He is blocking the door. The crew is still in there with sledgehammers." "He does not own the unit," I said. "Obsidian Holdings owns the unit. I am authorizing you to enter. Use the master key if you have to. If he resists, call the police for a welfare check and property damage." "We need a structural engineer to get in there and shore it up," the manager said. "But Mr. Brooks is screaming about trespassing." I hung up and dialed a number from my professional network. I needed a structural engineer who could be in Palm Coast in 40 minutes. I found one. A man named David who owed me a favor from a commercial zoning dispute 2 years ago. "I need you to go to the reserves," I told him. "I will email you the authorization. Do not ask for permission from the residents. Just get in there and tell me if the building is going to collapse." I sat in my car in the parking garage of my office, staring at the concrete wall. This was the moment where the lines blurred. Tate was my brother. He was an idiot, and he was a liar. But he was my blood. If I intervened now, if I sent in a crew to forcibly stop the renovation, I would be stripping him of his last shred of dignity. I would be proving, definitively, that he was a tenant in a life he claimed to own. I hesitated for exactly 10 seconds. Then I thought about the family living in Unit 304. Directly below them, I thought about the elderly couple in Unit 504. I thought about the weight of a concrete slab responding to gravity without its necessary support. Safety is not a negotiation. I sent the authorization email to David and the HOA. Subject: Emergency Stabilization Authorization, Unit 404. To whom it may concern, Obsidian Holdings authorizes immediate entry for emergency structural stabilization. The current occupants have no authority to alter the premises. All work must cease immediately. Remove the unlicensed crew from the property. An hour later, my phone rang. It was not David. It was Camille. She did not know she was calling the owner of the condo. She thought she was calling her sister-in-law to vent about the evil management company. "Quinn, you will not believe this," she shrieked. "Some random guy just barged into our house. He says he is an engineer sent by the owner. Tate is freaking out. They are trying to stop our renovation." "Camille," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Are you removing walls?" "We are just opening up the space," she yelled. "It is trending. Everyone does it. But this management company is harassing us. Tate told them to get out, but they brought security. They are saying the owner authorized it." "Can you believe the nerve? Tate owns this place." "Did Tate show them the deed?" I asked. "He does not have to show them anything," she snapped. "This is harassment. I am going to live stream this. I am going to drag this Obsidian Holdings all over the internet. I have 12,000 followers. Quinn, I will ruin their reputation. No one treats us like this." "Camille," I said, "if you removed a load-bearing wall, the building could collapse." "You sound just like them," she scoffed. "You are always so dramatic. It is just wood and drywall. Anyway, Tate is calling his lawyer. We are going to sue this fake company for emotional distress." She hung up. I stared at the phone. She was going to sue Obsidian Holdings. She was going to sue me. 10 minutes later, David the engineer texted me a photo. It showed the living room of the condo. The drywall was ripped open, exposing the skeletal remains of the wall. A temporary steel jack post had been hastily installed by David's team to catch the load of the ceiling beam that Tate's crew had just sawed through. The text read, "You were about 20 minutes away from a major failure. We have stabilized it, but the unit is uninhabitable until a permanent steel beam is installed. We had to kick the crew out. The male resident is threatening to call the police on us." I replied, "Let him call." I leaned back in my seat. I had protected the building. I had protected the neighbors. I had even protected Tate and Camille from being crushed by their own stupidity. But I had crossed the Rubicon by authorizing the stop work order. I had formally declared war on their fantasy. Tate was now in a position where he had to explain to his wife why a faceless corporation had the power to stop him from renovating his own home. He would have to explain why he couldn't just fire the engineer. He would have to explain why he had no legal standing to stop the crew from installing emergency supports in the middle of his living room. He would lie, of course. He would tell her it was a misunderstanding. He would tell her the HOA was corrupt. He would tell her he was going to sue. But I was done with the shadows. I opened my laptop and drafted a new email to my attorney. Nolan. Subject: Eviction and Damages. Unit 404. Draft the notice. Breach of lease. Unauthorized alteration of property. Endangerment of structural integrity. I want them out. I was not exacting revenge. I was simply removing a liability. And in the world of risk management, a tenant who saws through a support beam is a liability that must be liquidated immediately. I sat in my home office with the document spread out before me on the mahogany desk. It was a standard residential occupancy agreement, 3 pages long, stapled in the top left corner. 3 years ago, when I handed this to Tate, he had laughed. He had called it my little paperwork fetish. He had signed the bottom of page 3 without even glancing at the first paragraph. His signature a hurried scrawl of a man who believed he was above the fine print. He trusted me then. He saw me as his safety net, the boring sister who handled the administrative details so he could focus on being the visionary. He should have read page 2. Article 4. Section 2 specifically stated that tenant shall make no alterations to the buildings or improvements on the premises, or construct any building or make any other improvements on the premises without the prior written consent of landlord. It went on to define alterations as anything involving structural components, electrical systems, or load-bearing partitions. Tate had not just violated the lease, he had shredded it with a reciprocating saw. I forwarded a scanned copy of the agreement to Nolan Pierce, my attorney. Nolan is the kind of lawyer who does not raise his voice because he does not have to. His letters do the screaming for him. Draft the notice to cure or quit, I told him over the phone, my voice flat. Cite the structural damage, cite the unauthorized access by unlicensed contractors, and cite the immediate threat to the safety of the residents in the building. I want the tone to be nuclear. Nolan had the document ready within 2 hours. It was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It did not ask Tate to stop. It informed him that his tenancy was in active breach and that the landlord was exercising the right to immediate inspection and stabilization. We served the notice electronically and by courier. 48 hours later, I stood in the hallway of the reserves. I was not there as a sister. I was there as the authorized representative of Obsidian Holdings, accompanied by the Homeowners Association president, the building manager, and a licensed structural engineer named David. Tate opened the door. He looked exhausted. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a t-shirt that had seen better days. When he saw the group of us, clipboards in hand, faces stern, he tried to block the entrance with his body. "You cannot come in here," he said, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and bravado. "This is harassment. I am calling my lawyer. This is my home. You can call whomever you like, Mr. Brooks," the association president said, stepping forward. "But under the bylaws of this community and the emergency access statutes of the state of Florida, we are entering this unit to assess a reported structural failure. Step aside, or we will have the sheriff remove you." Tate stepped aside. The inside of the condo was a crime scene of incompetence. The open concept Camille wanted so badly was actually a jagged hole in the wall where a crucial support column used to be. The cheap handyman crew had not bothered to shore up the ceiling before removing the studs. The drywall dust covered everything: the expensive sofa, the wedding gifts, the hardwood floor. David walked straight to the exposed beam. He took out a laser level and a moisture meter. He took photos of the jagged cuts in the wood. He shook his head, his face grim. "They cut the king stud," David said, his voice echoing in the empty, dusty room. "Another week, and the ceiling would have bowed 3 inches. The unit upstairs would have come through the floor." I took photos too. I photographed the debris. I photographed the lack of permits displayed in the window. I photographed the damage to the subfloor. Every click of my camera was a nail in the coffin of Tate's defense. I did not scream at him. I did not ask him why he was so stupid. I simply went back to my office and authorized the next step. I could have evicted them onto the street that afternoon. The clause for imminent danger allowed for immediate removal. But I knew how that would look to a jury, and I knew how it would play on social media. I needed to be the reasonable party. I needed to be the benevolent landlord dealing with a rogue tenant. I instructed Nolan to send a follow-up letter. Due to the uninhabitable nature of the unit caused by unauthorized structural modifications, Obsidian Holdings is requiring the immediate vacancy of the premises to facilitate emergency repairs. The landlord will provide a temporary housing stipend of $150 per day for a period of 7 days to assist with relocation. It was not kindness. It was a liability shield. By paying for their hotel, I was proving that I was not malicious, just responsible. Camille called me an hour after the letter arrived. Her tone had shifted completely. Gone was the screaming banshee from the airport. In her place was the sweet sister-in-law voice she used when she wanted to borrow my car or ask for a favor. "Quinn? Hi," she cooed. "Listen, we got this scary letter from the management company. It is so ridiculous, right? They want us to leave our home. Tate is so stressed. I told him, Quinn will fix this. You know how to talk to these corporate types. Can you just call them and tell them we are good? We promise we won't knock down any more walls." She paused, waiting for me to jump in, waiting for me to say, "Don't worry, I will handle it." "Camille," I said. "Yeah?" "You removed a load-bearing wall without a permit. You endangered the lives of the family living above you." "Oh, come on," she laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "It was just a few pieces of wood. You are acting like we blew up the building. Look, we are family. Let's just work this out. Maybe you can come over for dinner? I will make that pasta you like." She thought this was a negotiation. She thought she could trade a plate of overcooked pasta for a structural engineering disaster. "Camille," I said, my voice dropping to a register that brooked no argument. "This isn't a conversation. It's a file." I hung up. That sentence must have terrified her. Because the next day, the legal threats began. Tate and Camille did not hire a real estate attorney. They did not hire a contract specialist. They hired Brett Kincaid. I knew Brett Kincaid. Everyone in Florida knew Brett Kincaid. His face was on billboards along the interstate next to the words, "Injured?" "I fight for you." He was a people's champion lawyer, the kind who wore purple ties and shouted at cameras about the evils of big business. He specialized in slip-and-fall cases and insurance settlements. He was loud, he was aggressive, and he was relatively cheap. They decided to sue Obsidian Holdings. The complaint was a work of fiction. It claimed implied ownership based on verbal promises. It claimed emotional distress caused by the harassment of the inspection team. It claimed that the structural damage was pre-existing and that the landlord was trying to blame the innocent tenants. They were convinced they could bully the faceless LLC into a settlement. They thought that if they made enough noise, the company would just give them the condo to make them go away. They believed they were fighting a cold, distant corporation that would not care enough to fight back. They had no idea that the faceless corporation was sitting in a home office 3 miles away, drinking tea and organizing the exhibits for trial. Nolan called me when the lawsuit was filed. "They are suing for title," he said, sounding almost amused. "They are claiming adverse possession and promissory estoppel. They want the judge to award them the condo. Let them, I said. Let them put it all on the record. They are asking for a jury trial, Nolan added. Perfect, I replied. They were walking willingly into the trap. They were building a stage for their own destruction, plank by plank, lie by lie. They wanted a public fight? I would give them one, but I would not bring noise. I would bring receipts. I opened the folder on my computer marked Litigation Prep. I dragged the scanned lease, the engineer's report, the airport incident report, and the audio file from the wedding into the folder. I was not just going to win, I was going to dismantle them. And the best part was, they were the ones paying the court fees to make it happen. The drive to Daytona Beach usually took an hour, but that afternoon, the stretch of Interstate 95 felt like a corridor closing in on me. My mother, Marla, had not asked me to come over. She had summoned me. Her text message had been brief and capitalized in all the wrong places. Family emergency. Come to the house immediately. Do not ignore this. I pulled into the driveway of the stucco ranch house where I grew up. The lawn was overgrown, a stark contrast to the manicured perfection Tate tried to project in Palm Coast. Inside, the air conditioning was set too low, making the living room feel like a meat locker. Marla was sitting in her recliner, a cigarette burning in the ashtray beside her, surrounded by a haze of smoke and grievance. Tate was slumped on the floral sofa, looking like a man who had been physically beaten rather than just legally notified. He did not look up when I entered. He just stared at the carpet, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. "Sit down," Marla said, pointing to the armchair opposite her. She did not offer me water. She did not ask how I was. She treated me like a defendant arriving for a sentencing hearing. "I cannot believe you are letting this happen to your brother," she began, her voice raspy. "Tate tells me you are refusing to help him with this housing crisis. He says you are jealous of Camille. He says you are letting her family ruin him." I looked at Tate. He refused to meet my eyes. He was letting our mother fight his battles, feeding her a curated version of reality where he was the martyr and I was the indifferent spectator. "I am not sure what Tate told you," I said calmly, crossing my legs. "But he was evicted because he removed a load-bearing wall without a permit. He endangered the entire building." "Oh, stop with the technicalities." Marla waved her hand, dismissing the laws of physics as if they were merely suggestions. "He is trying to build a life. He is trying to make a home for his wife. And now some faceless corporation is trying to steal it from him? It is predatory. Quinn, it is theft." I sat very still. "Steal it from him? Marla, he does not own the condo. He never did." "He has put sweat equity into that place," Marla shouted, her face flushing pink. "He has lived there for 3 years. It is his home. And now this company, this Obsidian whatever, is kicking him out on the street? We have to fight them. Tate found a lawyer, a good one, Brett Kincaid." I almost laughed. Brett Kincaid, the man whose face was plastered on bus benches. "Mr. Kincaid says we have a strong case for ownership rights," Tate mumbled, finally speaking. "He says we can sue for title based on promissory estoppel, but he needs a retainer to file the injunction." "How much?" I asked, though I already knew the number would be offensive. $35,000, Marla said. She leaned forward, her eyes hard. "Tate does not have it. Camille's father is already furious about the wedding costs, so you need to write the check. Quinn?" The room went silent. The ceiling fan clicked rhythmically overhead. "You want me to pay $35,000, I repeated slowly. "To hire a lawyer to sue the owner of the condo?" "Yes," Marla said. "It is the only way to save the property." The irony was so thick I could taste it. They wanted me to fund a lawsuit against myself. They wanted me to pay for the privilege of being sued by my own brother for a property I had let him live in for pennies. And the worst part was, Marla had no idea. Tate had not told her. He was keeping her in the dark, using her rage to unlock my wallet. "I will not do that," I said. Marla's expression shifted from demand to disgust. "Why? Because you do not approve of Camille? Because you are bitter that Tate found love and you are still whatever you are? Because it is a waste of money, I said, and because Tate is wrong. You have the money, Marla snapped. Do not lie to me. I know you have it. You have that corporate job. You drive that old car. You hoard everything. Then she delivered the line she had likely been holstering for years, the weapon she saved for when she really wanted to draw blood. What do you need the money for anyway, Quinn? You do not have a husband. You do not have children. You have no one to leave it to. It is just sitting there. Tate has a family. He has a future. You are just existing. The words landed with a dull thud. It was a sentiment I had suspected she felt, but hearing it spoken aloud, with such casual cruelty, was clarifying. In her eyes, my life had no intrinsic value. My worth was calculated solely by my utility to Tate. I was not a person. I was a resource. I did not explode. I did not cry. I looked at the woman who had raised me, and I felt the final tether snap. So, I asked softly, my voice steady, when I was paying your bills for the last 10 years, who did you think I was then? Was I just a bank account with a pulse? That is different, Marla huffed. That is what family does. We help each other. No, Tate interrupted. His voice was sharper now, less pathetic. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw the malice behind the panic. It is not just your job money, Quinn. We know about the inheritance. I frowned. What inheritance? Great Aunt Sarah, Tate said. When she died 6 years ago, you thought I didn't know. You thought I forgot. I stared at him. Aunt Sarah had left me a small policy, barely $12,000, specifically because she knew Marla would squander it if it went to the estate. I had never told anyone about it. I had put it into a high-yield savings account and forgotten about it. I saw the statement, Tate said, a smug look crossing his face. It came to the house before you moved out. I opened it. I know you have that money. That is family money. Quinn, it came from our blood. You had no right to hide it. You owe us that. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He had opened my mail. He had tracked a $12,000 check for 6 years, keeping a mental inventory of my assets, waiting for the moment he could claim it. This was not just entitlement. This was financial surveillance. They were not my family. They were predators. They had been watching my pockets, counting my pennies, and waiting for my guard to drop so they could harvest what they believed was theirs. I stood up. Sit down, Marla commanded. We are not finished. Yes, I said. We are. I picked up my purse. I am not paying for Brett Kincaid. I am not paying for the lawsuit, and I am certainly not paying for Tate to steal a condo that does not belong to him. If you walk out that door, Marla screamed, struggling to get out of her chair, you are done. Do you hear me? You are no longer part of this family. Do not expect an invite to Christmas. Do not expect us to call you when we are sick. You are cutting yourself off. I looked at Tate one last time. He could have stopped it. He could have told her the truth, that I was the owner, that I had supported them for a decade, that I was the only reason he wasn't in jail for fraud. He could have chosen his sister, but he stayed silent. He looked down at his hands, choosing the performance. He chose the lie because the lie allowed him to be the victim, and the truth would require him to be a man. You are right, Marla, I said, walking to the door. I do not have a husband. I do not have children. But I also do not have a mortgage I cannot afford, and I do not have a lawsuit I cannot win. I opened the door and stepped out into the humid Florida heat. And just so you know, I said, turning back to face them one last time, the faceless owner you are trying to sue? She has a name, and she has receipts. I closed the door on Marla's confused shout. I walked to my car, my legs shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of release. I drove away from the house, away from the guilt, and away from the obligation. Marla thought she was threatening me with exile, but she had actually given me a pardon. I wasn't losing a family. I was losing a contract I had never agreed to sign, and for the first time in my life, I was defaulting on the debt. The internet is a courtroom where the jury is intoxicated. The evidence is optional, and the verdict is decided by an algorithm that favors outrage over accuracy. In the week leading up to the hearing, Tate and Camille turned their social media accounts into a weaponized pity party. They posted videos from the mediocre hotel room I was legally required to subsidize. Camille, wearing perfect makeup that was applied to look like she had been crying, sat on the edge of the bed and spoke to her phone camera with a trembling voice. She told her 12,000 followers that they were being bullied by a greedy, faceless corporation. She used words like displacement and housing injustice. She framed herself and Tate as the plucky, innocent newlyweds who were being crushed by a landlord who hated love. They never mentioned the load-bearing wall. They never mentioned the unauthorized demolition. They certainly never mentioned that the greedy corporation was actually the sister who had paid for the wedding dress hanging in the closet. I watched the view counts tick up. 5,000, 10,000. People in the comments were offering to start a crowdfunding campaign for their legal fees. Strangers were calling for a boycott of Obsidian Holdings, not realizing it was a holding company with zero public-facing products. It was infuriating. But I did not engage. I did not comment. I did not report the posts. I let them build the pyre higher and higher, knowing that the taller the stack, the brighter it would burn when I finally struck the match. My attorney, Nolan Pierce, called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice was dry, the auditory equivalent of parchment paper. "We received the complaint from Mr. Kincaid," Nolan said. "It is colorful." "What are they claiming?" I asked, scrolling through a spreadsheet of HOA fines on my monitor. "Everything," Nolan sighed. "Breach of implied contract, promissory estoppel, unjust enrichment. They are claiming that by allowing them to live there, the landlord created an implied promise of ownership. They are also claiming sweat equity, arguing that their unauthorized renovations increased the property value, entitling them to a share of the title, and, of course, intentional infliction of emotional distress." "It is a fantasy," I said. "It is legally incoherent," Nolan corrected. "I can file a motion to dismiss right now, based on the lease agreement and the deed. This case has no standing. The judge will throw it out before we even get to discovery. We can end this by Friday." I paused. A dismissal would be clean. It would be cheap. It would send them away. But it would not silence them. If the judge dismissed the case on a technicality, Tate and Camille would spin it. They would tell the world that the system was rigged. They would claim the rich corporation paid off the judge. They would remain the victims in their own minds and in the eyes of their followers. They would spend the rest of their lives rewriting the narrative, telling anyone who would listen that they were robbed of their dream home. "No," I said. "No?" Nolan sounded surprised. "Quinn, a trial will cost you money. It will take time. A dismissal is the smart play." "A dismissal is a bandage," I replied, my voice hardening. "I do not want a bandage. Nolan, I want an amputation. If we dismiss, they get to keep their story. If we go to court, everything becomes public record. The lease, the damages, the lies. I want a verdict. I want a judgment so absolute that they can never lie about this again without risking perjury." There was a long silence on the other end. "All right," Nolan said finally. "Then we prepare for theater. I will schedule the hearing for Monday." I spent the next 4 days turning my home office into a war room. I was not just preparing a defense. I was compiling an autopsy of our relationship. I pulled the bank records from the last 10 years. I printed every single transfer, every Venmo payment, every check written to cover a temporary cash flow issue. I created a master ledger, a single document that showed the flow of capital. Column A, money Quinn gave to Tate. Column B, money Tate returned to Quinn. Column A was 6 figures. Column B was 0, but the financial disparity was not the weapon. It was the context. I dug into the files from the condo purchase. I found the emails where Tate had explicitly asked me to buy the unit so he could rent it until he got on his feet. I found the text messages from 3 years ago where he thanked me for the low rent and promised to follow all HOA rules. Then, I found the smoking gun. It was in the pile of documents the HOA had confiscated from the unauthorized contractors. It was a work authorization form from the handyman crew. At the bottom, under the section marked Property Owner's Signature, was a familiar scrawl. Tate had signed it. He had not signed as tenant. He had not signed as resident. He had checked the box for owner and signed his name. This was not just a lie. It was fraud. By representing himself as the owner to a third-party vendor to authorize structural work, he had exposed himself to criminal liability. He had created a false instrument. I added the document to the stack. Then, I went a step further. I reached out to my contact at the venue, the one who had sent me the audio recording. I asked for the initial inquiry forms Tate had filled out when he booked the wedding. She sent them over within the hour. There it was, in black and white. On the financial disclosure form required for the wedding payment plan, the one he had used to try and get credit before asking me for money, he had listed real estate assets at $450,000. He had listed the address of my condo. He had used my property to falsify his net worth to the Hartwells. He had secured his marriage, his reputation, and his father-in-law's respect by leveraging an asset he did not own. I printed the form. I placed it on top of the pile. This was the kill shot. This was the piece of paper that would not just lose him the lawsuit, but likely his marriage, on Sunday afternoon. I went shopping. For years, I had dressed to be invisible. I wore beige, gray, and soft pastels. I dressed like the supportive sister, the background character. Tate and Camille had mocked me for it. They called me frumpy. They called me a librarian. I drove to an upscale boutique in the city center. I did not look at the sale rack. I walked to the new arrivals. I bought a suit. It was not flashy. It was not covered in logos like the things Camille wore. It was a deep, midnight blue, tailored to within a millimeter of my life. It had sharp lapels and structured shoulders. It was the kind of suit worn by women who sign checks, not women who beg for them. I bought a pair of heels that added 3 inches to my height, steel-tipped stilettos that sounded like a gavel striking a desk when I walked. I hung the outfit on the back of my bedroom door. I looked at it. It was armor. At 9 o'clock that night, my phone buzzed. I was sitting in bed, reading a book, the house quiet and cool. The notification was from Camille. It was a picture, a selfie of her and Tate, raising glasses of cheap wine in their hotel room. They were smiling, but the smiles didn't reach their eyes. Tate looked clammy. Camille looked manic. The caption read, "Last night in this dump. Tomorrow we get our house back and you pay our legal fees. Can't wait to see you in court. Come watch successful people win." I looked at the message. I looked at the phrase, successful people. They truly believed it. They had surrounded themselves with so many lies that they had actually convinced themselves they were the heroes of this story. They thought that because they wanted something, they deserved it. They thought the law was a contest of popularity, not a system of facts. I did not type a reply. I did not send a witty comeback. I did not block them. I simply turned off my phone. I placed it on the nightstand next to the file that contained the deed, the lease, the fraud, and the truth. I set my alarm for 6:30 in the morning. I closed my eyes. Most people toss and turn the night before a trial. They worry about the unknown. They replay arguments in their heads. But I did not worry. I knew exactly what was going to happen. The script had already been written. Tate just didn't know he was reading the lines for a tragedy. I slept deeply, like a baby, or perhaps more accurately, like a judge who has already written the verdict. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a small civil division room, not the grand halls seen on television, but the stakes felt heavy enough to crush the air out of my lungs. On the left side of the aisle, Tate and Camille sat huddled together, holding hands like a pair of tragic lovers facing a firing squad. They were dressed for sympathy. Tate wore a soft blue sweater instead of a suit, trying to look like a humble homeowner. Camille wore a modest white dress, her hair pulled back, projecting an image of innocence that I knew was as manufactured as her social media feed. Their lawyer, Brett Kincaid, paced the floor in front of the judge's bench. He was exactly as advertised, loud, theatrical, and sweating slightly in a suit that was a shade too purple. "Your Honor," Kincaid boomed, gesturing wildly toward his clients. "This is a simple case of corporate greed. These two young people, these newlyweds, have poured their hearts, their sweat, and their dreams into a home. And now a faceless entity, this Obsidian Holdings, wants to throw them onto the street over a minor misunderstanding, a few pieces of drywall, a renovation meant to improve the property. It is an eviction born of malice, Your Honor. We are asking the court to recognize their equitable interest in the property and grant them the title they have earned through years of occupancy and care." Tate nodded solemnly, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. Camille looked down, shoulders shaking with a practiced sob. They were performing the role of their lives. They expected a bored corporate representative to walk in with a briefcase and a monotone voice. They expected someone they could villainize without guilt. My attorney, Nolan Pierce, stood up. He did not wave his arms. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the judge. "Defense calls the owner of Obsidian Holdings to the stand," Nolan said quietly. The double doors at the back of the room opened. I did not rush. I walked down the center aisle, the heels of my new shoes clicking against the linoleum with a rhythm that sounded like a clock counting down. I wore the midnight blue suit. My hair was sharp, my posture was rigid, and I did not look at the floor. I walked past the plaintiff's table. Tate looked up. At first, there was confusion. He frowned, his brow furrowing as if he was trying to place a familiar face in a strange context. Why is Quinn here? Did she come to support me? Then, I saw the realization hit him. It started in his eyes, widening in shock, and spread to his jaw, which went slack. He looked from me to the witness stand, then back to me. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a physical blow. The slow, creeping horror of understanding washed over him. He had sued Obsidian Holdings. I was Obsidian Holdings. He had sued the hand that fed him. I took the stand. I placed my hand on the Bible. I swore to tell the truth. "State your name for the record," the bailiff said. "Quinn Brooks," I said, my voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. "Sole member and managing director of Obsidian Holdings." A strangled noise escaped Camille's throat. She stared at me, her mouth open, her eyes darting between Tate and me. "What?" she whispered, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Tate, what is she doing?" Tate did not answer. He was staring at the table, gripping the edge so hard his knuckles were white. Nolan approached the stand. "Ms. Brooks, do you recognize the plaintiffs?" "I do," I said. "Tate Brooks is my brother. Camille Hartwell is his wife." "And what is your relationship to the property in question? Unit 404 at the reserves?" "I purchased the property 3 years ago," I stated. "I hold the deed, the mortgage, and the insurance policies in the name of my holding company." "Did you have a lease agreement with Mr. Brooks?" "I did." "And what were the terms of that lease?" I looked directly at Tate. He refused to meet my gaze. "The rent was set at a symbolic rate," I said. $25 a month." A murmur went through the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked up from her notes. $25? she asked. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. It was a family arrangement to help him save money. I covered the mortgage, the taxes, and the association fees. He was only responsible for the utilities and the $25. "And did he pay this rent?" Nolan asked. I opened the folder in front of me. "In 36 months. He paid it exactly 11 times. The other 25 months were forgiven." Camille stood up. "That is a lie," she shrieked, her poise shattering. "He owns that place. He told me he owns it. You are just jealous because we didn't invite you to the wedding." "Sit down, ma'am," the judge barked, banging the gavel once. "One more outburst and you will be removed." Camille sank back into her chair, but her eyes were wild. She turned on Tate, whispering furiously, hitting his arm. Tate sat like a statue, frozen in his own catastrophe. Nolan continued. "We went through the evidence. I presented the deed. I presented the bank statements showing every mortgage payment leaving my account. I presented the notices from the Homeowners Association regarding the unauthorized demolition. I presented the engineer's report detailing the severed load-bearing beam. Then, Nolan played the trump card. Ms. Brooks, do you have any evidence regarding the plaintiff's claim of ownership to third parties?" "I do," I said. "I have a vendor agreement signed by Mr. Brooks for the demolition crew, where he fraudulently identified himself as the owner. And I have an affidavit from Graham Hartwell." Tate flinched. "Please read the relevant portion," Nolan said. I picked up the document. "Mr. Hartwell states that Tate Brooks explicitly represented the condo as his personal asset to secure approval for the marriage. Mr. Hartwell further states that upon learning of the deception regarding the property and the wedding funding, he has severed all financial ties with the plaintiffs." The silence in the room was absolute. Tate had lost his home, he had lost his lawsuit, and now, publicly, he had lost his safety net with his in-laws. The judge did not need a recess. She looked over her glasses at Brett Kincaid, who was now frantically shuffling papers, looking for a loophole that did not exist. "The plaintiff's case is dismissed with prejudice," the judge ruled, her voice leaving no room for argument. "The court finds that Mr. Brooks has no legal claim to the title. Furthermore, the eviction is upheld due to the severe and dangerous nature of the lease violations. The plaintiff is ordered to pay damages for the structural repairs in the amount of $22,000, as well as the defendant's legal fees." She slammed the gavel. Adjourned. It was over. I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the courthouse steps. The air felt lighter. The humidity didn't bother me. I felt a sense of clarity that I had not experienced in a decade. "Quinn, wait!" I stopped and turned. Tate was running down the steps after me. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His blue sweater was rumpled. His face was pale. Camille was nowhere to be seen. She had likely stormed off to call a divorce lawyer or her father, finally understanding that her husband was not a misunderstood genius, but a liability. Tate stopped a few feet away from me. He was breathing hard. "Quinn, please," he said, his voice trembling. "You cannot do this. $22,000? I don't have that kind of money. Camille left. She took the car. I have nowhere to go tonight." He reached out a hand, the old reflex kicking in. "Just help me with the hotel for a month, just until I get a commission. Please, I am your brother." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taken my money, mocked my life, destroyed my property, and then dragged me into a court of law to try and steal what was left. I reached into my purse. Tate's eyes lit up. He thought I was reaching for my checkbook. He thought the pattern was resetting. He thought he had won. Instead, I pulled out a small white envelope. I had prepared it that morning. I stepped forward and pressed it into his hand. He opened it. Inside were 4 $100 bills, the exact amount he had shoved at me in the valet lane. "You gave me this to fix myself," I said, my voice steady and final. "Keep it. Fix your life." I turned around and walked to my car. I did not look back to see his expression. I did not wait for him to scream or beg. I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. I drove past the highway on-ramp that led to my old life, and I kept going. I was not triumphant. I was simply unburdened. I had finally resigned from the position of being my family's emergency fund, and the severance package was peace. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear your thoughts. So please leave a comment down below telling me where you are tuning in from and what you would have done if you were in Quinn's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that notification bell so we can share this journey with even more people.